Thanks a lot for coming, guys. I'm going to speak really quickly because I just got told that I've got slightly less time than I originally planned on. So if it gets confusing, I'm going to blame it on that. At the start, I've got to say that you're not seeing my slides at all. Slides? Okay. So I'll start off by pointing out that 30 minutes is a really short amount of time. In fact, you're not realistically going to be able to teach anyone anything about cybersecurity in 30 minutes. Mostly, you can hope to entertain them, or maybe give them a few pointers so that they can go back and actually do something useful with it. So I'll at least try to be entertaining. There's two problems when you get a cybersecurity presentation. Either they start to show you stuff that's technical, mainly to try to show you that they're clever, or they show you a whole bunch of insane costs of cyber war or costs of cybercrime to try to scare you into buying stuff. At this point, I'm about 0 for 2, because I'm not trying to sell you anything, and if any of you know me, you know I'm not going to try to act clever. That ship has sailed. So for the most part, the topic's going to be on cybersecurity and fake news, but we could have just called it cybersecurity problems that you have that you probably can't solve, that you should probably be thinking about. Now, one of the other problems with security presentations is someone comes up, makes you scared, cries wolf. You manage to go a year or 2 years and not have a serious problem, and so then you write it off as an unnecessary waste of time. So I'm also not going to do that. What I'm going to do is two things. One, I'm hopefully going to entertain you a little bit with some research that we did almost 5-6 years ago. And then I'm going to ask you just one other question. So in the end, I'll hope to leave you with two questions that you need to be thinking about. So first, the presentation that we did, about 5 years ago, we did some research called Weapons of Mass Distraction. Okay, and the whole point was to see how much we could use online media to do bad things, how much we could influence people's thinking using online media. And we aimed at a bunch of popular online communication methods. So we aimed at mail lists, polls, Twitter, Reddit, news sites, and comment systems. I won't discuss all of them. Again, we pushed for time, and I'll fly through it. When it comes to online polls, most news organizations run them. And hacking online polls is not new. Most of you should recognize back in 1998, Titanic had just filmed. Leo DiCaprio was probably at his cutest self. And People magazine ran a poll to see who's the best looking or most beautiful person for the year. Leonardo DiCaprio ended that poll with 14,000 votes. And the winner with 230,000 votes was this guy, Hank the Angry Drunk Dwarf. Okay, and that's because hackers online thought it was funny to rig the poll, which they did, and they then sent 250,000 votes for Hank. So Hank legitimately won. This keeps happening, right? Time magazine had a poll in 2009 for the most influential person, and amongst world leaders, you find that the winner was a guy called Moot. Okay, and Moot, if you don't know, is the guy who runs the /B or 4chan. And this time the attackers were even cooler. They didn't just make Moot win. They arranged the other names so that the initials would spell out Marble Cake the Game. Okay, because that's some sort of inside joke with the guys at 4chan. When we did this research, we aimed at a couple popular polls. So we aimed at Huffington Post. And indeed, it was trivial. So we could spin up an instance on AWS, start voting, and then decide whether we wanted to win a poll slightly so that we win but not look obvious about it, or win a poll dramatically. Again, it would cost us just cents on the dollar, and we could win any news site's poll there was. Polls are kind of passé. Not many people waste their times with them. What you should be checking out is Reddit. Okay, at this point, almost everyone's heard of Reddit. And Reddit has a bunch of subreddits. So there's Reddit, there's world news. And Reddit has this complex algorithm to decide what stuff drifts to the top. Okay, so they take number of votes, they take how hot the topic is, how fresh the topic is. And so we tried to see how easily we could influence Reddit just by writing bots and writing scripts. And predictably, the answer is we absolutely could. So we could take completely arbitrary nonsense stories and push it to the top page of Reddit just by getting our bot armies to vote for it. And one of the interesting side effects, given the current Trump-Russia insanity, is that when we made the front page of Reddit, at the time, almost everyone accused us of being Russia. So people assumed that we were Russia influencing the votes when it was 3 guys working on AWS out of South Africa. So we aimed at newspapers, and this should be interesting for the guys with Al Jazeera's front page. Mail and Guardian in South Africa has a section called Most Popular This Week. Okay, most websites have something like this. And effectively, what the site, or what the section of the site does, is it features the stuff that's viewed the most. But viewed the most is something we can easily control. So effectively, we could take any number of articles, or any article that exists on the site, and bring it up to their front page, even if the story actually happened months ago. In the picture there, it's not really clear, but we used their articles to spell out our names. It's not just small guys like the Mail and Guardian. We took aim at the Wall Street Journal. And one of the things you should see about the Wall Street Journal is they're a little more complex. So when they decide to show you what's hot on their website, they use a combination of page views, Facebook, Twitter, email shares, and comments. Okay, and based on all of that, they decide a story is getting hotter. And of course, what you should be noticing is how much of that is outside of their control. Okay, so as an attacker, we just had to register Twitter accounts and share the stories with ourselves, and effectively, we made the story artificially hot. So we could take any article, again, and promote it to #1 on their page fairly trivially. Click a button and make that the hot story for them. It's not just them. We took aim at the New York Times. New York Times are a little more personal, so they have a ranking that says what's the most emailed article on their sites. We can do emails easily. We registered 30,000 email addresses on their website. Effectively, it means we can take any article there and promote it to #1. What's interesting is lots of these sites, you actually have a paywall, so we couldn't actually read the stories. We could just influence what we showed the rest of the world. New York Times is particularly interesting. They spend all this money on their news gathering apparatus, and effectively it cost us about 12 cents to register 30,000 accounts. It cost us about 18 cents to share all of those stories. The benefit of being able to dictate what's on New York Times front page, pretty priceless. So after news sites, we decided to take a look at comment systems. I won't go into detail here because it's fairly technical. But we looked at 2 primary comment systems. We looked at Discuss and we looked at Livefire. What's interesting is, at the time, Jazeera was running Discuss as their comment system. And 2 things were interesting about this. One was, we discovered a vulnerability in Discuss that allowed us to see more information than we were supposed to. But using that vulnerability, we were then able to examine Discuss more closely to see whether they were real accounts or fake accounts. This was actually stolen from data on Al Jazeera. And what you should notice here is all of these users are surprisingly created in alphabetical order. Okay, so we found at the time about 200 users that were all created. And while this graph looks a little obscure, what you're actually seeing is the creation time of accounts on this graph. Anyone who's done a little bit of programming will point out that these accounts have all been created at 5-second intervals. So first, you've got these 200 accounts all created in alphabetical order, and then you've got them all created 5 seconds apart. So essentially what someone did is they created a list of usernames, and they said, create account, sleep 5 seconds, create account, sleep 5 seconds. If you then track those accounts, you see them posting on Jerusalem Post, AJ English, CNN. In fact, on some stories, we found these commenters would comment up to 80% of the comments on any useful article. So we went into a great deal of statistical analysis of this. In the end, it was pretty clear. These bot armies were dominating most of the stories on Syria, most of the stories revolving around Palestine or Israel. What's interesting is, at the time we published this research, almost none of these sites knew about it or knew how to handle it. Again, what's interesting, and it's a theme that you'll see coming up again and again, Al Jazeera runs their website, or Jerusalem Post runs their website, and they outsource their comments to Discuss, or they outsource their engagement tracking to Twitter. When we as an attacker are attacking Twitter or attacking Discuss, there's nothing Jazeera really gets to do about it. Essentially, these attackers can now attack third-party infrastructure and affect your site. Again, this is pretty well known. The Intercept ran a story post the Snowden leaks that showed that the Five Eyes, so the intelligence agencies of the West, had already been doing this for a long, long time. The UK GCHQ has a department called JTRIG, and JTRIG's sole aim is to deny, disrupt, degrade, and deceive using online attacks like this. It's essentially to use online techniques to make something happen in the real or cyber world. So this stuff's been happening for a long, long time. My only question on this is, if you're running a news org or managing a news org, where does your security team fit into this stuff? Okay, typically, you'll have your security team, and typically they out there patching servers or making sure people's workstations don't have viruses. These are one of those problems that sit in the cracks because they exist between the newsroom and between technology. And generally, sitting in the cracks is where attackers like to play. So if there's one takeaway from this, it's that your security teams need to be playing more with your newsroom, and your newsroom needs to be playing more with them. Simple things like online polls, like Reddit AMAs, all of this stuff has far-reaching consequences, and you probably want to make sure that your security teams are involved in it. So the important thing is, who's watching this for you? Now, I said I'd talk about two things. The other thing I want to talk about is F500 versus T400, which is just about as obscure as it gets. Most of you won't recognize this guy. For security geeks, they will. He's probably one of the most famous chief security officers in the world. So he was the CISO of Yahoo. He's now the CISO of Facebook. And much like newsrooms, both those orgs are interesting because they exist to do one thing, but they actually attract state-sponsored attackers. Okay, both Yahoo and Facebook are frequently targeted by the sorts of guys who target you. Now, Alex gave a presentation a few years back where he took a look at the Fortune 500, and he broke the Fortune 500 up into the Secure 100 and what he called the Toasted 400. Okay, and essentially what he was saying was, if you took the Fortune 500, there's like 100 of them who know how to play the security game. Note, he's not saying that they're invulnerable. He's saying they know how to play the game. And he says the other 400, everybody else, are just toasted. They're broken, they're security broken, and they don't even know how to fix it. What should be sobering for all of us is, if you look at what those Fortune 500 companies make and the amount of money they raise, you're talking about billions and billions of dollars, and they can't get security right. What happens to news orgs that are struggling on tight budgets? And realistically, you have to ask yourself, if they are the toasted 400, where do you think your organization sits on the spectrum? So someone asked Alex, if you take the toasted 400, what do you think they're missing? What's needed to take them from toasted to the secure 100? And interestingly, his answer was secure software engineering, engineering-focused incident response, and the ability to create, not buy, tools. That last one is super, super important, because one of the things that's becoming clearer and clearer to the world for information security is that generic solutions fail. Okay, if you're trying to buy some Trend Micro solution, a McAfee solution, or Cisco solution, and hoping that it manages to keep you safe, I can tell you now that you've got no hope. For almost any attacker who's worth his salt, those defenses won't stand up at all. And it makes perfect sense, right? A little while back, Mark Andreessen said, software is eating the world. Okay, so Tesla's not a car company, they're a software company that makes cars. It makes sense that even your network defenses need to come from actually building software. And so one of the questions after all this doom and gloom is anyone in the world getting the cybersecurity stuff right? Okay, unfortunately, there are some examples that are coming through. You see companies like Etsy, Facebook, Airbnb, Slack, Uber. And I want to quickly dive into what these guys are doing different to most of the other companies. Firstly, if you search for them, you'll find that their security teams frequently publish on security engineering or security tools that they're actively building. Something else that's interesting, just from some of the discussions we've had today, almost all of these are cloud-first companies. Okay, if you've got a deathly fear of moving to the cloud, it's worth noting that almost all the examples of companies that I've given are companies that have actually made this transition already. That's not because the cloud's inherently more secure, it's just possible to secure it. So you have all these guys putting out documents on how to build secure things and releasing tools on how to make things more secure. What you see up there is a guy called his name is John Flynn, and John was working for Facebook and introduced two-factor security for them. So whatever company you're working for, you probably had a time when they tried to introduce tokens so that you securely authenticate to stuff. You probably hated it because it probably interrupted your day. There were times you tried to log in and it interfered with your day. John Flynn's got an interesting talk where he talks about how they implemented two-factor authentication at Facebook. Now keep in mind, Facebook have all these developers who multiple times a day log into servers, and now you're asking them to every time they want to log in, take out this token and read the digits on it and then put it back. It'll never fly. And so John talks about the solution they built to make two-factor happen. And what's most interesting is they got it down so that it's more convenient to use two-factor authentication than to not use it. So now all of Facebook use two-factor not because it's more secure, but because it's actually quicker. And the side benefit is that it's also more secure. These are two guys from Square, and they gave a talk on how they secure Square's infrastructure. I won't bore you with the details right now. The next one I wanted to show you is a guy from Slack. Slack has a really small security team, but you guys should know that if Slack gets compromised, there's thousands and thousands of organizations' details that are at risk. So you've got this really smart security team building custom tooling to make sure that Slack actually stay one step ahead of the competition. What do you notice about all of these companies? Okay, there's something interesting here. The first thing that you should notice is that you don't have security guys standing around with a clipboard telling you what you can and can't do. Okay, in all of these instances, what you see are security teams building solutions to make possible what the org wants to do. Okay, so they're not standing around saying, thou shalt not do this. Rich Smith gave a talk for Etsy that I like quoting, where he says, if security introduces blocking, it'll be ignored, not embraced. He says their success should be measured by what they enable, not what they block. And the last quote that I really like is he says, if your security engineers don't like hard problems and coming up with novel solutions, you've probably got the wrong security guys. Okay, and so there's a big push now to start to get security teams that build solutions that the org needs. And of course, your natural reaction should be, it was hard enough to find security guys, now you want me to find security guys who can build solutions. And it's true, it is hard. But the honest answer is that software scales better than people do. Okay, a few good security guys building solutions is better than 100 security guys who are pushing buttons on the latest Cisco appliance. So I said I'd leave you with 2 questions. It'll be brief. There's just 2 things for you to ponder. The first is, you need to ask yourself whether your security team is actively engaging with all of the problems that actually exist for the newsroom. Okay, if you've got a security team that's just patching servers, chances are they're not protecting you against the stuff that really matters to you. Are your journalists going into hot zones actually protected? Is someone trying to figure out whether they can tell fake news from real news? Is someone trying to make sure your home in the cloud is secure? And the second one is your security team completely reliant on solutions they build, solutions they buy as opposed to ones they build? If they are, you need to start looking for a better security team or start upskilling the security team you have. That's all that I have. I've been told to rush, so I suspect I've done it in a reasonable amount of time. I think we've got a moment or 2 if anyone's got any questions. Yes, sir. Multiple. If you shout it out, I'll repeat it. Right. Right. So the question is, especially in the GCC, people immediately want to know where the data sits, and they are nervous about data that they can't physically touch. I think there's 2 things that are interesting about this for us. The one is, I think a lot of that comes from badly understanding threat models. So I think people need to start figuring out what the actual threat model is. I think there's some basis for concern. Like I know Jazeera had times in the past where foreign service providers cut access at a time when they needed it most. But I think there are 2 things that are interesting here that'll help you going forward. The one is, that ship has sailed. Like, anyone who's using their iPhone today has no idea what data is actually sitting on their iPhone, what data is sitting on iCloud. If you're sitting on iCloud, you're actually sitting in Google's data centers, because that's where Apple data is sitting. So I think increasingly that ship has sailed. Stuff's going to happen in the cloud. But if there are people who are irrationally against the cloud, and I think there are times when it needs to be addressed reasonably, mainly that points to a problem. Essentially what you're looking at are security as people saying no, instead of people saying, well, we can move to the cloud and get this benefit, but let's add this so that we know that we have a layer of security on it. As a general heuristic, if your security guys say a blank no, instead of, well, that's ugly, let's try to figure out a nice way to do it, then you should start looking for new security guys. So there's a question next to you. Same question. Anyone else? Going once, going twice, sold. I'm Haroon, Meer. If you've got any questions, you can tweet me or I'll be around. I'll happily hit them afterwards. Thank you very much.